wanted to write something completely different because we're both kind of on a governance level. We've led many of the leading kind of Danish institutions on design or within the design field, and we thought we'd write the ultimate book on Danish design. And then we realized that might be a little bit self-aggrandizing, and there are topics way more interesting. We're sliding into different subjects, and we kind of had to revise the book a ton of times, and just thought of what would you want to hear, specifically someone that's not within the field and someone that's not Danish.
We wrote the book in a conversation with each other, and we were just basically discussing where we felt that the field needed to go and what we were really occupied with and interested in. And so that ended up with being the key themes in the book. So it actually felt quite natural, but it was a big shift from where we started.
I don't think any of the research as such surprised us, but kind of in our cooperation, I think we got to know different sides of us. So it brought us many different places. And so I guess that there are many angles to being Danish that does not relate to design.
What we needed to find out was how to write something that's universal. As you said, this is not a book for a specialist audience or for a very narrow audience. It's a book for the enlightened citizen. Those that want to change things, those that want to innovate, those that are concerned with the state of the world, that wants to be a change maker. And so what are the lessons we have learned, both nationally but also globally, that we could share, and being sort of in that way agnostic about what kind of culture or context our ideas could be used in. So that's our hope, that this could be used anywhere on the planet.
It's a process, right? And this is one of the critiques we have in the book, that actually, there's no more thinking in design thinking than any other type of design. And so the book is also about bringing thinking into design thinking. You have a hypothesis, as you have in science. You have a wish, and then you have a few intuitions about where you want to go. You project a world or person in which direction you want to go, rather than an analysis where you break things apart. And then you ideate around this, and then you come up with something, and you just start iterate, and you have to start over many times. And at the end, you can kind of get to a result where you're happy.
It's a human-centered approach to innovation and change. As Jens Martin says, it's kind of a process that you can learn, and you can teach the process, and you can apply the methodologies, doing the research, doing the ideation, the brainstorming, building the prototypes, testing them with users. Then it's becoming almost like I wouldn't say paint by numbers, but I would say kind of a replicable process. And that's what made it attractive to business, because they can say, oh, we can put creativity almost in a bottle. And of course, as Jens Martin says, it's the strength. That's why design thinking has become such a widespread approach also in large corporates. I mean, organizations like IBM have trained 150,000 people in design thinking, and you see the similar programs in other large corporates. But what are the limitations? Where does design thinking kind of end? And as we say, it kind of ends with asking more fundamental questions about how do we need to think? Who do we need to involve? And design thinking has no natural language around, for example, sustainability, which has become the maybe most pressing and urgent agenda for business now.
It's a thing that can be used by anyone. And again, it's being appropriate as a business method. But the book is also kind of how do we go beyond that, right? So there's certain limitations. So as Christian was saying, it's human-centered. And if you look around the planet now, with all of the troubles we have in terms of, mainly global warming, but also the conflict in Ukraine and a host of other things, they are man-made, right? So if you keep, optimizing for humans, there are some limitations to how far we can go. How do you protect an ecosystem if you optimize for the guy who wants to build a house in the ecosystem and not the ecosystem, for instance? The speed of business is completely different today, right? And the speed of business means that some customers, they want a result in 2 weeks. This is a tough thing, especially because then they also want something that lasts for 30 years in terms of the effects, the effects on global warming, for instance, they are not here and now, they're out in the future. So you have this kind of almost paradox that things need to happen here and now, but they need to foresee a very distant future, right? And they are both results of speed. So the faster it goes, the faster you need to do things, and also the faster you are far ahead in the future. Design thinking is not good at solving these things because it's kind of a lengthy process, and it's not made for a future. It's made for a kind of a near future for humans.
Building stuff for the near future for humans is what got us into this mess in the first point. And so even though we're not taking a big bash at design thinking, we are really suggesting that we are at a time now where we really need to go beyond the success of design thinking.
One of the advantages is that you can design for a desired future. So if you kind of project a future that is just going to continue as it is, you're not going to have any innovation breakthroughs. You're just going to keep doing what you do, just doing it slightly better or slightly more advanced. So you need to project a completely different future to get that. I mean, if you think of just science fiction movies, we actually ended up with the StarTech phone that they ran, that they used in Star Trek. So it's these wild projections and how humans we can become. Is a very unique feature with design thinking.
Design thinking the term is almost interchangeable with human-centered design, and there's been other terms thrown around. But the notion that by going behind what people say they want and really understanding their true needs, empathizing with users, and then also, as Jens Martin suggests, creatively proposing new solutions and then iterating them, testing them with users, getting the human feedback, finding out what's attractive, what's meaningful, what makes sense to people. It's really powerful. And in that way, human-centered design has been a counterweight to technology-led design, right? Where it's tech and its specifications and it's what's technologically possible that's been the driving force. Our commercial world, both the digital and physical one, has been shaped by human-centered design. Enterprises that bake in design skills and competencies at the C-suite level, build design teams, use these methodologies in a systematic way, measure how they do, improve things, and iterate. They outcompete their peers by 30% over time. Question is, if we continue that way, where will we end? And so we need to, as Jens Martin kind of hints at, start taking some more disruptive leaps of imagination. We need to expand the way we think about what solutions are needed. We need to maybe go beyond to this human-centeredness that's maybe not sustainable.
The first one is time. We tend to have fairly short time spans in what we do. For instance, elections are, often time spans of 4 years. How can you solve many of the major, challenges today within 4 years? It's just not really realistic. And with corporates, you have, quarterly reports. What can you achieve within a quarter, right? It's fairly little. So having, thinking about time span in a different way. So for instance, blue chip companies that make the most money are not ordinary stock listed companies. They are majoritively owned by a foundation. They're not philanthropic foundations. They are about making business, but they're about creating long-term value. Board members are going to say, we're not making any money. Their family owns many of these foundations, and they're, we don't care, because in 20 years, we're going to make a lot of money, right? And those bets often come true, and they are just best bets than 3 months or 1 year bets. But of course, you also need to look at the very near future.
The second expansion we propose, which we call proximity. We are really talking about a term that's very big in design thinking, which is the idea of empathy, of empathizing with users, with understanding customers, and also their unmet and unrecognized needs. What we're suggesting is that we need to expand how we look at this notion of proximity or closeness in order to get more relevant action. So, for example, how do we think about underserved users, those that are not the mainstream? We're also saying, well, who says that everybody we should care for are human beings? How about caring for other species than humans? What about nature? What about these ecosystems that we need to care for? What about the biodiversity? We already now see rivers and other natural resources getting rights like a personal rights, so that in terms of protection and in terms of what we can do to them legally. In the book, there's a quote: "With what right do we even cut down a tree and make it design into a designer chair? Do we need to rethink the rights of nature?" Proximity also has to do with the connection between citizens and decision makers. How do we close the gap between the elites and those who decide, and those who vote, and those whose opinions are maybe not always taken into account? So we're taking a pretty broad perspective on this notion of proximity and getting closer to problems. One example in the book is an artist, Olafur Eliasson. He's an Icelandic Danish artist who chipped off blocks of ice from the ice cap up in Greenland and popped them down in Paris and in London and in Copenhagen for citizens, and to experience these huge melting blocks of inland ice, reminding all of us that the climate is changing and the ice cap is melting, and this is what it actually feels and looks like up close.
The third expansion is life. It's basically expanding what we perceive or what is life. So there's a ton of things out there happening. So, for instance, lab-grown meat, is that alive or not? People that can download their conscience or memories rather onto computers, are these alive? You've got humans being more and more humanoid. You've got AI in virtual space. What rights do they have? I mean, now in the US, there's a very lively debate on when life starts. Imagine if you start having that debate in terms of robots. When does a robot become an entity or a ethical agent that should pay tax, that can earn revenue, etc. So we have completely different boundaries of life, and that obviously also implicates a lot of thought with how can we harvest that value to make money, and how can we avoid making some of the mistakes we have made in terms of ethical challenges with business that we've seen when innovation isn't really thought through before it's brought to the customer.
The fourth expansion we have is value. And here we are challenging the way we think about both what value is and also how it's created. So first and foremost, we're looking at a business environment and a world where increasingly value creation needs to focus on impact, which means environmental and social impact, where we of course still want to think about finances, think about the business model, but big companies are increasingly focusing on what difference do they make in the world rather than putting money first, which is a huge shift also connected to this long-term thinking. So we need to start balancing value and measuring value in new ways to capture the true impact of what we're doing, and to also get new ideas about developing business. Same, of course, goes for governments that in a way are born with the idea of value for citizens or for society, but that also had a tendency to look mostly on finances and drive sort of the budgetary approach to change and innovation. And then there's the question of how we create value. Now, we've built a world around a linear approach where we start as a firm by extracting minerals and resources from the ground. We then process them. We design products. Then we package them, and they are then sold to consumers, who then consume goods, and then they discard them, throw them away, and then they become waste. And that model is simply not sustainable anymore, and we need to shift towards, first and foremost, circular economy, circular models of value creation, so that we recycle and reuse and even regenerate the resources we draw out of the earth. And we also suggest, because of course our economy is not driven only by physical products and physical goods, but also by intangibles like services and digital economy, that to go into that kind of value creation, we need to look at networks and think about how, as a company or an organization, we are part of a widespread network of actors, and actually our value creation could be reinvented and innovated by looking at the relationships we have with actors around us, suppliers, customers, partners, and so on.
The fifth one that we call dimensions, that one is probably the most abstract of all of them. But if you think about what dimension we live in, of course we live in a physical world, but we also start living in a virtual world, and we kind of assume that this happened because it was meant to happen. It came about because it had to come about. But humans could have chosen a complete different route. Many of the biggest companies in the world, they deal with a digital world. We can't assume that this is how it's going to be. My personal assumption or guess is that it's going to be biochemical, and with all of the things we're seeing with CRISPR and so on, all of a sudden we can kind of hack biology. To be future proof, we need to think of these different dimensions. We tend to kind of be in this little dimension that we're in, just as when we're only in a physical dimension, we assume that's it, right? And now we just added one and we think that's it, right? We can keep going. So that's the fifth.
And last one, we have an expansion called sectors. And in a way, it's kind of an amazing thing. We're in a world where we see the public sector becoming more proactive in many ways, actually innovating or contributing to innovation. So, for instance, not a lot of people are aware of this, but most technology you'll find in your standard iPhone was funded by taxpayers and created by government labs around the world, whether it's the flat screen or the internet itself, or it's the compression software, or it's even Siri, the voice recognition. It's all originally taxpayer funded, either through basic research, applied research, or grants to startups and companies. And so we're seeing that shift, and government is becoming aware of its role in creating innovation and change in society. And then we're seeing business, as I mentioned before, turning to more societal value, more impact, more sustainability, and so forth. These sectors are becoming more intertwined, and we see a future where the public sector, the private sector, but also civic organizations and the research sector needs to collaborate in new ways that are more hybrid. We see philanthropic organizations almost becoming policymakers because of the amount of funds they can throw into a particular public problem or field. It's not maybe expanding sectors as much as it's almost like the amazing imploding sectors upon each other. And out of that, of course, comes new types of jobs, new types of organizations, and really a new landscape in business that we need to relate to. The other day, we had a group visiting at the Danish Design Center from a very large international bank. So the company had identified, a set of challenges they wanted to work on, and a set of really difficult, tough questions. And they had a few ideas already. So what we did was we built a framework with these 6 expansions and said, let's challenge your ideas. Let's challenge the problems you're coming with. And then they basically went through a workshop session where they used the 6 expansions as creative fuel, as ways to stimulate their thinking. What would happen if we thought about this in a much longer time frame? What kind of role would we play as a bank in a world where these sectors are kind of mixing in new ways? Which users are underserved, and how might we think about more inclusive approaches to our products? Maybe even think about what does sustainability really mean for us, and so on. We can take these pretty wide-ranging notions and then make them quite concrete and applicable to a concrete business problem.
Ideally, you would go through all of these expansions and really see how could this really broaden your thinking to come up with something entirely new, right? But I think at the get-go, to even start doing that, you need to accept that the future will be designed. It's not just going to happen to you. So we got to understand that it's completely us to choose that future. And we're not saying that we need to choose a Danish future. You need to choose whichever future is desirable to you. so I think that's really one of the key takeaways, that you can design this future. It's basically thinking that the future is determined, and that the technologies we have today are not there by choice, but because they had to be. Some people will accept, okay, we could go in different directions, but very few will actually accept that we could have gone in different directions. There's this assumption that we're here as as a natural cause of what happened before. This predetermined path, that is deterministic, and in case of technological, we think that the technologies we use are predetermined.
What we are expanding here in terms of tech determinism is really the notion that it's mainly one part of the world where all the new ideas are coming from, and that they are necessarily all good. I think not only are we seeing a globe where we have other centers of innovation, Africa as an example, we see Asia. I mean, look what's coming out of China on AI and face recognition. You can discuss how it's used, but you can certainly see that it's highly innovative and highly useful for many purposes. In the Nordics, where we have our base, there's so many innovations in energy, innovations in sustainable materials happening, sustainable business models happening. So why not take a broader look at the world and see, to get inspired and innovate? We are arguing that you can really benefit from taking this much more global perspective on where to look. 10 years ago, there's a huge fascination with all the technologies coming out of also social media and big tech. Today, there's reckoning that just because something is tech and is online, it's not necessarily good. So in a way, we're also at a place where we are becoming more realistic about are we seeing all of these technologies? Is that the future we want, or should we go somewhere else, and should we maybe make other choices? And that's really the essence of this critique of tech determinism that's in the book.